Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining me. I'm just in from the workshop and I thought I would share progress. Day 18 of the scale model tugboat build. 18 days in. Lots of hours, lots of behind the scenes planning and a few videos along the way. When you have these longish projects, which I tend to do each winter, you need to keep your morale up, your drive, your motivation. And there's certain points along the way where parts arrive and they just spur you into action. You just know that you're going to make giant strides forward. And today's been one of them days. First of all, I'd like to mention the supplier, House Models in the UK. They're in Oxfordshire. Very knowledgeable model boat builders. I dare say they build all sorts of models, but when I talked to them recently on the telephone regarding props, size of props, left, right hand, one of each, two of either, they were very, very helpful. So thank you, House Models. You not only supplied me with information, but you got the parts to 12-inch 4mm prop shafts and a pair of 35mm propellers, one left hand, one right hand, as per your recommendation. So thank you. I have no qualms in recommending you for anybody looking for model boat parts in the UK. So, couple of prop shafts, couple of propellers. So what? Well, as you might have gathered, as I go along through a project, I have to stop and visualize what's going to happen with the parts, with the project as a whole. It's a juggling act. I make no bones about it. I use the whole project to help my mental well-being. Yes, I know there's going to be highs and lows, but if you capitalise on the highs, they can sometimes carry you through, and the lows don't seem as bad. So, just recently, with a total failure on the brazing, that could be seen as a low, but turning that around with a good old Araldite, and while I was waiting for another order of that to arrive, what should arrive but the props and prop shafts. So it's time to mount them. Now, if you've been following the project, you realise that I had two massive great holes below the waterline for thrusters. and then I changed my mind and I wanted to use deck mounted motors and corresponding prop shafts, and the prop shafts will go through the rear bulkhead, and the prop shaft tubes will be bonded into the bulkhead to seal them with, yes, you guessed it, with further araldite. So I need shares really, or maybe even araldite to support me. So if any of you have any contacts at araldite, let them know that I'm using their products to good effect. Anyway, back to the project. So the first step was to mount the deck. I had to trim it slightly after bonding the bow of the hull. It was nipping the deck slightly, so I trimmed the deck, and then I used a couple of wing nuts to just firm it down to the support rails. So with the deck in place, I put the superstructure temporarily in a position I thought looked right. Then I pulled up a photo of the actual Banbury Cross tugboat from the 60s, and after a long and careful thought I arrived at the correct position for the superstructure on the deck. I put some witness marks on the deck so that when I moved the superstructure I could see where it would be mounted eventually. The superstructure is going to surround the two electric motors and also house the two prop shaft tubes. But enough of that for now. Let's just go back to the mounting the motors and all of the running gear. So I had some temporary marks or witness marks on the deck where the superstructure was going to go, and I'd calculated I needed 12-inch propeller shaft tubes. So I worked out, and it was a case of suck it and see, but I needed to cut a hole in the deck for the prop shaft tubes to go down through the deck towards the rear bulkhead. So a hole at each corner of the marking out, pilot drills, larger drill, and then a jigsaw dressed up with a file, and I had a nice hole in the deck. I also made it large enough to put my hand in should I ever need to work below decks. That may well be where I position the batteries. It'll certainly be where I position any ballast, and I am expecting to need ballast after early indications from the buoyancy test of partially dunking the front, the bow, in the sink if you watch that video. So a hole in the deck, 12-inch props, position the motors side by side on the deck near the hole, arrived at a distance between centre lines of the motor prop shafts, transferred that same 75mm centres to a suitable position on the rear bulkhead, because it's obviously going to be parallel and it's going to exit the hull with the same centre line as on the deck. Marked off where I wanted the holes, tried to avoid looking at the great big holes that the thruster tubes once occupied. I'll sort that out when it comes round to sealing the rear. Drilled a pilot hole at each of the 75mm points, then measuring the prop shaft tubes, I drilled a hole of a suitable size using the pilot holes as guides, and this enables me to have prop shaft tubes exiting the bulkhead at the rear of the hull with not a lot of play, and they're going to be bonded in with a good old Araldite. So, attaching the prop shafts, one to each motor, poking it through the holes in the hull, and I couldn't resist attaching a propeller to each. As I said earlier, I'd ordered a left hand and a right hand propeller, and the guidance given to me by the model shop was that a boat will go in more of a straight line if you have a pair that is one left and one right. Now, I don't think it matters which is which, it's just one is going to offset the other when it tries to skew the journey of the boat. So I took note and took photos in case I ever need to replace one of the props or either. I took note of which prop I put on which shaft, but I think it's inconsequential as long as you have one left and one right. So, poking the prop shafts through the rear hull, attached to the motors, all looking good. And yep, the temptation was too much. I wanted to see him run. Now the motors aren't bolted down, they aren't attached, but that has never stopped me in the past, and it wasn't going to stop me today, because, as I say, you need these little morale boosts throughout the project. These are what keep the fun in all the work. And it is work, but it becomes a joy as well as work. So, if you've been following the progress, you'll see that I had tested out the twin electronic speed controllers and the radio control system, and each battery pack, so the wiring was straightforward. Think of each motor as a separate unit. That's a separate channel on the radio control, a separate electronic speed controller, a separate battery, separate wiring, separate on-off switch. If you think of it like that, you probably understand my logic a bit clearer. So I not only tested it forward and reverse on both props, but I filmed it, and I'm dead chuffed that it's another step along the way. In some ways it looks as if the project's further on than what it is, but like any project, I can guarantee that the last 10%, whenever I come to that, the last 10% will be harder to accomplish than any other 10% of the build. So yes, it's progress, yes, it's massive progress, and yes, we can visualize what's going to happen with the drive, where it's coming from, how it's working, and what the challenges are. But it's then time to knuckle down and get on with the graft of finishing off each part which I'd left, like the thruster holes, the mounts for the motor, the fitting of the superstructure over the motors, the positioning of the batteries. There's a lot ahead. Hopefully you keep joining me along the way and see how progress is. Well, thanks for watching. Join me again soon for more progress on the scale model tugboat build.